Hello and welcome to the third video in this series of how to paint High Marshal Helbrecht's armor, and this is the final part on the bronze NMM on his armor. This is the absolute final stage where we're just going to smooth the transitions and re-emphasize the highlights on the armor, tone down the midtones, and deepen the shadows depending on which part of the armor we are technically speaking from. I start off with painting in deeper shadows with Rhinox. The colors on the wet palette are the ones we used before in the stages before, with the addition of white and the fact that we are now using the Rhinox which we had before on the palette but did actually not use. So I start off by painting in the deepest shadow parts in the armor. For example, on the inside of his leg, or in this particular example I'm doing right now, at the part where, depending on the light sources we set at the start of the painting process, we imagine a deep shadow would form. Please remember that this has absolutely no realistic, how should I say it, no connection to this painting in the shadows and highlighting does not 100% relate to how real metal would behave in this kind of lighting situation. The only thing that is important is that we sell the effect and that it looks cool in the end. Of course, we have to stick to some rules, but I mean, it's a piece of art, it's fun, and to be honest, in my opinion, it's not important to strictly stick to realistic light behavior. If the miniature looks good and metallic in the end, you definitely did something right. And I think we can say, even now, and especially when we're coming to the end of this video and finally the end of this armor, that definitely looks metallic, at least in my opinion. Okay, so as you can see, just paint in the parts where you imagine or would think the deepest shadows would form. The jump between Mournfang Brown and Rhinox Hide is not as extreme, but it's enough of a jump between the tones so that there's a definite contrast between the darker mid-tone areas and the deepest shadows. Paint consistency is, as always, about 50-50 water to paint, or even a bit thinner, depending on how old your paints are, etc, etc. So keep that in mind when I tell you about the consistency. I think you can pretty much clearly see in the videos how thick and how translucent the paint really is after the application. The next step here is to smoothen the blends, again with some Mournfang Brown. Again, the paint is very thin, so that you have a very, very, very translucent layer. Because I think it's the easiest to smoothen transitions with very translucent paints. You apply this mainly between the parts where you painted in the Mournfang brown before, for the pre-shading. In my case, I airbrushed them in, and between the XV88. It's not only for the transition between those colors, or between the pre-shading and the real first highlight stage, but what is also important is by painting back in some of the red-brown tones, you get some more color information in the midtones, and you get more of a red-brown bronze look and less of this gold look we achieved in the last two parts. You can also do this in glazes, depending on how much of this red-brown or brown you want to have in the armor. There is no strict rules on how you have to make the metal look, but keep in mind that this will definitely make a difference in how much or how gold or how bronze or how copper the part will look in the end that you paint. That said, we will definitely glaze later on, but we will only glaze with the Rhinox side to pull together the highlights and the shadows. As you can see, I applied in a kind of uneven, scribbly, scratchy manner, however you would like to call it. This is just my preferred way of blending. I'm not a big fan of making big blocks or stripes right to another and then glaze over them part by part. Both techniques have their pros and cons. I think this is a bit faster and also, in my opinion, a lot easier, even though it may not be as 100% smooth and perfect, but that is not the goal for me. In the end, this miniature is not for Golden Demon or any competition, but just high quality play miniature, tabletop miniature, whatever. Of course, it's maybe a bit more, well, we can be honest here, even way above what most people would consider a tabletop miniature, but it's definitely by far not a real display or display quality miniature, although I think that would probably depend on who you ask. Okay, so as I said, I just apply the Mournfang brown between the transitions to smoothen them a bit out. This also works as some kind of shadow, lighter shadow area. So as I said, I think in the last video, for example, we over highlighted his left leg or right leg way too much, and now would be the time to tone down the highlights And I do this by starting to add Mournfang brown in these areas as a basis to work from. Everywhere where I put bounce highlights, I'm starting to paint over the edges with the Mournfang brown to also narrow them a bit down and darken them a bit down to make them appear a bit smaller and to make them look a bit more like real reflections and not big reflections where most of the light hits. So yeah, as I said, just do this to all the parts where you think some smoothing out and some more color would help. In general, it's not a bad idea to do this all over the armor, but as I said, especially it makes sense in these areas where you would expect more shadows or the armor in general to appear a bit darker. Which probably some people were thinking about is that yes, these videos are pretty long, but this third part is the only part where I really cut out a lot of painting, because this is very repetitive and you already did most of the main work, so you already know how this kind of style, this kind of painting works. The parts I'll show you now are interesting because they focus a bit more on the technique of the blending. And so all in all, I invested about around 2 to 3 hours to get this far, just painting. I filmed the whole process, just cut out the scenes where you either would not be able to see what I'm doing or where nothing really happens. So more or less you saw everything in nearly real time. As I said, this last part you're now watching is pretty much the only one where I really cut out about, let's say, 20 to 30 minutes. So you would probably be able to replicate this in around 3 to 4 hours, or even faster than me, because on this mini it was the first time I did it, and now you saw how I did it, and maybe you already can cut some corners on things that I did wrong or have to correct later. So why do I tell you this? I tell you this because I get the feeling that most people think you have to really work a long time on one part of a miniature to get it to a real high standard. But to be completely honest, if you just paint it in one base color, one highlight, and started edge highlighting every edge this armor has, at least I would probably not be very much faster painting this mini. I'd probably cut about half an hour or maybe an hour, but what I want to say is that doing this full armor in bronze or gold NMM did take me just about 1 to maybe 2 hours longer than if you would do a really careful and clean job with base coating, highlighting and edge highlighting. And I, for my part, think that this style looks way more interesting, not only on pictures or in pictures, but also in the hand, in the flesh, and on the table. So I'm saying this to encourage you to try this out, because I think you really can gain some experience and also maybe joy by trying new things out and seeing your results and then being happy about them because you finally tried something that maybe you were afraid of before or anxious to fail. And I can tell you, I needed around 1 to 2 years to really get the hang of painting non-metallic armor or metals in general, and once you get the hang of it, at least that's the way I see it, you really never go back to anything else. Or maybe if you go back to painting things in true metallics, you start thinking about them on a whole different level and maybe consider trying new things out using filters, or instead of just a wash over the metallics, maybe you start using inks to get more color into them and deepen the shadows and so on and so on. So I think learning this style of painting metallics is a real interesting way in learning something about highlight placement and shadow placement, which is also very important. So I can only encourage you to try it out on really any miniature where it makes sense. Okay, so you saw the process of really smoothing out all of the transitions on the mini. Now we're back to Ice Yellow, our highest highlight so far, and start re-emphasizing the parts where the reflections are the brightest. As you can see, we have also some white on the palette, which we're going to use later for really some very bright reflections, but we only use it very sparingly. Because as I mentioned before, if you just take some tiny dots of white, the effect is way more extreme than if you would over highlight everything with white. So in the exact way as we deepened the shadows and darkened down some areas, we are now going to re-highlight some other areas just to bring the contrast up a bit again. Now we're going to the white. Now we're going to the white paint. Just as I mentioned a minute ago, we apply these in very, very, very pronounced areas where we would suggest or think that most of the light collects. And as I said before, very, very sparingly and just in very, very tiny amounts, because this will make the reflections look way more extreme than if we overdid it. Also, yeah, autofocus is focusing on my hair. I'm sorry for that, but as I said, I'm still trying to get the setup in a way where I can really paint details and also the video being able to show everything. So there are some hiccups here and there where maybe the autofocus will not be able to focus completely on the mini because, for example, my hair or head being in the way. I'm sorry for that. I try my best to keep that from happening in the future. The white is also very thin, probably even a bit more thin than the other colors. Just so that I have a bit more control over how translucent it gets, and this also helps with smoothness, so that you don't have these typical chalky white highlights. Although I must say I use almost exclusively the AK 3rd generation white, and I think it's already on the very, very smooth side in comparison to many other white colors on the market, especially the Citadel whites, which I probably didn't touch for about 4 or 5 years. If you don't want to go all up on white, it's perfectly viable. You can either just stick to the ice yellow or go to an off-white color like maybe ivory or off-white, depending on the paint brand you're using. It's perfectly fine. Use whatever you want. Also, the stage is completely optional. You can also just deepen the shadows, and this way it will add significant contrast in one direction. You don't have to push the contrast in both directions. Okay, so now we have a glaze of Rhinox hide. I just took some of the paint that was already on the palette and added some water on it. Later on you will see me add a bit more water because it still was very, or not very, but rather on the thick side. But as you saw just on my thumb and nail, it's pretty much just colored water. What I'm doing here is I'm painting from the highlight areas, but try not to touch the highest highlight points. Glaze in long strokes from the highlight area into the shadow area. And this will have not only the effect that it darkens the area a bit and tones it down, but also the other effect is that it also adds color into the armor in these areas. If you like to, you can also glaze in some Mournfang brown to get more of this reddish brown into the armor. It's perfectly viable to do this, and as I said before, it will just slightly change the look, but yeah, it's really your choice to experiment on it's really your choice to experiment, and I would encourage you to try many different things, because I think adding variation into non-metallic metals is just a lot of fun. On later stages, when we start with painting the steel or silver metal areas of this armor, you will see that there are many possibilities on how to paint metallics, and that it nearly is possible to do metallic effects with every color combination. You can see I already or also painted in the trim area of his right shoulder guard. I somehow forgot to do it before, and when I was finished with this stage, I thought I can paint that in. That really took just a few minutes. It's not that complicated. You have not much area to play around anyways, and in these areas it's pretty easy to get a very cool looking effect. It really is only hard on bigger areas with not much detail and no breaking up between parts. So yeah, we could have done it in a different color, but I thought, yeah, this will probably also be bronze. I add in some more of the white just to bring it back to a bit more higher highlights, to give it more shine, especially in the shoulder and chest areas. I think it's very important to have these higher reflections, so that when you have the front view of the Mini, it really pulls in your view into these areas of interest. Yeah, so now that we've reworked all of the parts of the armor that we painted before, the only thing I thought to do right now to give me a better overview and a better basis for the next details we're working on, I just thought to paint in the areas black that I want to paint next, just to have a cleaner basis to work from. This is something that is completely optional and you don't have to do, although I like to do it just to, as I said, have a cleaner workspace in front of me and to be able to see more easily how the isolated parts we already painted look. Also for the steel parts or silver metal parts we are going to do, I would recommend to start from black. Not that it wouldn't be possible to start from a different color, but I will show you the process how to do it from a black basis, and I also think it's a lot easier, especially in the areas where you have much detail and not much room to paint, to start from black paint and then highlight up, because you get a way higher contrast by starting from a black basis. Yeah. By this stage you see most of the parts are already painted in. There's only some minor parts where some brown is still shining through, and I think it already looks a lot cleaner than before, and you can already see how different all the work we did before does look now when held against the contrast of the black painted parts. Just be careful to not paint over the areas we worked on before. Even though I again use pretty watered down paint, black is something that is not easy to get off already painted parts. So yeah, just be warned, be careful, be very neat when applying this, and then there's nothing you have to worry about. yeah, now you see a shot of the stage we are now in, and I think you can see that the armor looks a bit more smoother, and also I pretty much like how the parts we darkened down came out, and I personally like the stage we are now in, and I'm pretty happy with everything painted so far. The really interesting part is now when we start painting in these other parts. By the next video, I hope to have already filmed and painted the sword, his mechanical arm, which we will do completely in steel, and maybe even parts of his cloak and tabard, and also all the minor and small details that I will paint in silver or steel. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this last part on his armor, and as always, I appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or send me a direct message on Instagram, for example. Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed my videos so far, and yeah, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.